All right, and welcome to the second session, second question and answer session of the Power of Play Symposium from the Journal of Emerging Sports Studies. We are so thrilled to have everyone here, and there are more people joining us throughout the talk. We'll keep letting them in. Let's start by introducing each other. We'll let everyone introduce themselves, let's start with Conor, as he's currently on screen here. Introduce yourself, tell us where you're at, and maybe tell us a bit about what you research.
Yeah, perfect. So, hi everyone. My name is Conor Heffernan, and I'm assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. This is Bodhi, my dog. I'm sure all of us have appreciated dogs, cats, and children coming into Zoom windows at various points. So, my research for today is looking at Hercules Gymnasium in Dublin, in Ireland. Obviously, with my accent, I'm Irish. And the interest in Hercules is that this is a cooperative, working class, working men's gymnasium that's established in Ireland and provides an alternative pathway to health and body cultures in Ireland, which tended to be quite middle class and more money than Hercules would have been.
Fantastic. Alec, how about you?
Hi, I'm Alec. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Austin. Don't worry, Conor and I are socially distanced by about 3 or 4 miles, so we're all right. My research today is on the Garth Fagan dance troupe, the first all-black dance company in Rochester, New York. It was sort of more of a pet project of mine. Broadly, my dissertation focuses on community socio-political development in the global Rust Belt. And being from Rochester, there were race riots as a byproduct of the George Floyd killings earlier this year, and they were almost on the anniversary of a devastating racial attack in the 1960s, and I was interested in looking at what the role that sport played in the aftermath of that, and that led me to Garth Fagan's work, and so I'm going to explore that a little more as we go through the day.
Fantastic. Nicholas, how about yourself?
All right, I think I unmuted. Okay. Hi, I'm Nick Villanueva. You can call me Nick, not Nicholas, if you all want to. My research, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and my PhD was from Vanderbilt with a focus on a history degree with a focus on social movements in the 20th century. And my current project, which what I presented, is actually part of a chapter in my manuscript that, fingers crossed, will go through peer review this fall and hopefully get the contract, submitting it to University of Nebraska Press. But the project is titled, or the book is titled, Rainbow Cattle Company, The History of the International Gay Rodeo Association. And my focus and emphasis is on the idea of gay liberation in rural parts of America, and also the focus on liberation not being about sexual freedom, which is what is the overused narrative about gay liberation movement, when in fact it was actually about creating churches that were LGBTQ friendly or even organized and run, as well as sports, and sport that's very heteronormative, like rodeo. It's fascinating that it is now 44 years of the Gay Rodeo Association. And last thing I'll just mention, I say gay rodeo and not LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus rodeo because it's trademarked gay rodeo, and that's how they've referred to it for decades. And so it's not something I'm going to change just for my writing.
Perfect. Eddie, finally with you.
Can you guys hear me? Cool. So everyone, my name is Eddie. I am a grad student at New Mexico State. I'm currently working on my master's thesis titled Framing Prolympic Cheerleading, Intersectionalities and Collective Identities of Team USA Cheer. The proposed research that I'm doing will first analyze how the USA cheer team members frame or construct their individual and collective identities as a contested emerging sport in America. Specifically, I will be utilizing a social constructionist framework and draw on theories of collective identity, framing, and intersectionality approaches with a focus on race, ethnicity, gender, and class. I will be employing a qualitative methodology to capture the voices of today's top cheerleaders in the U.S. I will also use theoretical sampling and use snowball sampling to interview approximately 20 to 36 coaches and athletes of the national co-ed cheer team. Currently, cheerleading has ended its provisional Olympic status and is at the cusp of becoming an Olympic sport if added to the Paris 2024 or Los Angeles 2028 Olympic Games.
That is fantastic, and thank you all so much for these introductions. My first sort of endeavor here is to present a broad question to each of you, because I think it would be interesting now that many of you have already viewed the presentations, and the presentations are visible online in perpetuity. I'd like to know how you came about your research. What drew you to your particular topic? So maybe if we could start with you, Conor, and we can find out what drew you to the topic of your presentation.
Yeah, perfect. I think it is interesting because we're all looking at quite disparate things, but I think one of the unifying themes for me is kind of identity through sport, or maybe challenging preconceived notions and finding areas for people to, I suppose, exhibit or find new ways of expressing themselves. And for me, something that really interests me about body cultures in Ireland in the interwar period, so 1920s, 1930s, is the class distinctions within this area. So we have these middle class gymnasiums that are tied up with a muscular Christian, strong mind, strong body ethos, which tended to have sort of prejudiced views towards working class exercises in Ireland. So the thing that interested me is looking at these kind of ground up approaches in which individuals could forge their own identities, forge their own spaces, where they could have their own communities with different ways of being than were traditionally being kind of vaulted or promoted within the Irish context. And also, I was a member of Hercules Gymnasium, so I probably should get.
Oh, you were a member of the gym itself. Well, that's fantastic. Awesome. Nick, let's go to you next.
Okay, well, my project, I came across this by just random chance. I had never heard of the Gay Rodeo Association, and I was researching the prison rodeo in Texas. Oh gosh, about 4 or 5 years ago. No, even longer than that. I was still a graduate student. And every time I would search either online or I was at an archive, I kept coming up with these rodeos, gay rodeos. And I thought that was a fascinating topic, but it was already in my research for finishing my PhD. So I kind of put that aside and said I would come back to that at a later date. And now that I'm director of critical sports studies at CU Boulder, it fits perfectly with the scholarship that they want me to produce, intersectional and so I've been interviewing many of the members. Thankfully for me, most of the material is archived either online or in Golden, Colorado, which is just a short drive for me. So as a historian, I just felt like I just fell into this by luck and chance.
That's fantastic. That's really nice to have access to archives so close by as well. Alec.
Right. And I wasn't trained in like queer theory, so this is all a lot of work for me and new for me, but I do follow sort of, if anyone's read Jim Downs' Stand By Me, Forgotten History of Gay Liberation. That's what I believe my project will do. We'll continue this conversation of the unknown stories of gay liberation, not the largely sort of urban story and such.
That's fantastic. I love the presentation. I encourage anyone who hasn't taken a look to go have a look on our site. Alec, tell us a bit about how you got to your research.
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Taylor. I think one of the things that makes this panel so interesting is that you're already seeing themes across. Eddie and Nicholas wrangling in the intersectionality, which is so important and something I have woefully left behind in my own research. But to those of you who are engaging with it, it's phenomenal. Honored to be here with you guys. My research is, I was looking to do something with my hometown, essentially. A few of my dissertation ideas had fallen a little flat with the evolving job market. And so I figured, well, if I'm going to be stuck somewhere doing research, I might as well be stuck home to sort of, find archives close to people. So Nicholas, taking a cue from you, I suppose. And I also tend not to do modern research, which I know is a hole in my portfolio. So this was a chance for me to examine a charismatic figure who is living, and that's not, from my historical background, is not something I'm usually comfortable with. Thankfully, there's any number of archival data and source work for Garth Fagan and his evolution in Rochester. And this was just a chance for me to step outside my comfort zone and look at a living, evolving situation, certainly with the broader racial conversation that's engulfing the United States. It's a chance to deliver some pertinent research. And there are some questions of gender that he tackles, but he's also someone who has neglected a larger city in preference for a smaller area. And I think that's sort of a theme that connects us. Nicholas, you're saying, when I listened to your presentation, why did they, sort of consolidate in these smaller towns that didn't maybe seem to be as progressive as you would think a gay rodeo would emerge. And Conor, certainly the gym that is perhaps less well known in the academic community. And Eddie, your research, certainly it ties into this idea that I had no idea that cheerleading was bound to be an Olympic sport. And so I think it speaks to that larger issue of discovering something in a smaller area.
Fantastic. And on that same topic, Eddie, let's hear how you got to your research.
So I've been a student athlete since my undergrad years. I've been doing Division I cheerleading. And so I think it was very interesting to notice that there isn't a lot of research on cheerleading. So my proposed research is going to tap into that elite population, which is the highest level of competitive cheerleaders. What's interesting is that I'm currently at my college team's cheer team, and two of my coaches were members of previous U.S.A. cheer premier co-ed teams. So it kind of gave me an avenue to kind of like explore and discover like the grievances that a lot of the cheerleaders in America suffer. For example, we don't have a lot of funding. We're not under NCAA funds. A lot of the athletic departments don't fund cheerleaders for the competitive aspect. Also, the sport is very feminized, so people think that it mostly involves sideline activities and dancing and stuff like that. But there's a different aspect that a lot of people don't know. It's just the competitive side. So I'm hoping that my research can, help highlight some of these things that are happening in the community, and also inform people about how competitive it is and how it's gonna become hopefully an Olympic sport in the future.
That is fantastic. Thank you all so much for that introduction. And again, if you're watching this and you're watching this perhaps in the future and you'd like to take a look at these presentations, you can go to our website and view all of them. So let's get to the questions that have been submitted. The first question is for Conor, and it's about, let's take a look at this question right here. Conor, is there something uniquely Irish about the Hercules gym and its cooperative mandate? Is there a political dimension to the gym's structure? And I think this is in reference to the sort of, when it says in Irish here, something about the Free Irish state. Is there something that is uniquely Free Irish about the way that this gym's cooperative structure works? Or is that something that you see then commonly among gyms, perhaps in the United Kingdom more broadly?
Yeah, and I think it's actually an excellent question, because it is a political movement, but not exactly in a kind of Irish nationalist sense. So the idea of the cooperative gymnasium that Hercules becomes actually comes from Great Britain, with the magazine Health and Strength starts setting up these Health and Strength affiliated gymnasiums. So the Hercules Gymnasium is the first Irish Free State, soon to be Republic of Ireland, gymnasium to establish itself with that Health and Strength association and with that communal structure. And I say this is arguably a political move because Health and Strength is banned in the Irish Free State during this time. So it's quite a subversive thing to actually set up and establish itself. Health and Strength is seen as a lewd and crude magazine for daring to show men in their boxers flexing their muscles covered in oil. Maybe they had a point, maybe they didn't, but it is actually quite an interesting place, because then within the gymnasium, they start to trade magazines that have been banned in the Irish Free State. And this is physique magazines, and rather than say pornographic or politically subversive magazines. So although it isn't uniquely Irish in the sense of this didn't happen in Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, or Wales, it is still a political sort of establishment, because it is a place that is affiliating with a magazine that is banned in the Irish Free State. It becomes an arena through which individuals can trade materials, trade stories, So it's politicized in one sense. And then the distinctly Irish connection to that, I suppose, is that it is affiliating with a banned magazine, because Health and Strength is not banned in Northern Ireland, which is a semi-autonomous state. It's not banned in England, Scotland, or Wales. So yeah, it is politicized, but with a sort of asterisk attached to it.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Nick, I have a question here submitted by a member of our editorial board, which asks, what relationship has the gay rodeo had with the mainstream rodeo community, especially given the expansion of things like professional PBR and other large-scale rodeos?
It's a great question. Thank you, whoever submitted that. Early on, the athletes competing in the gay rodeo, if they were on the semi-professional or professional circuits with mainstream rodeo, they wore, and I might be getting this reversed, they had red bibs with white numbers versus those that were not part of mainstream rodeo had white bibs with red numbers. And the announcers would state that, you cannot take photographs of anyone wearing a red bib. This could jeopardize their standing, because there was intense homophobia. And they would, which is one of the reasons why the group formed the Gay Rodeo Association, so that they could have this safe space to be able to celebrate with their same-sex partner, if that's the case, or be openly competing as a transgender athlete. And so that was the initial relationship, or lack thereof, that these athletes were kept in secrecy. Now today, there are so many mainstream, if you will, cisgender heterosexual identifying rodeo athletes that are at the junior levels, and they're competing at the Gay Rodeo Association, because it's open to anyone. And it's just it's amazing to see the camaraderie that occurs and the acceptance of each other. I mean, for these athletes, this is a semi-professional, or I guess we'd call it amateur rodeo, but there's still prize money. There's still the opportunity to train and compete in that setting and prepare yourself for maybe a future rodeo. And for the fans, bull riding is one of the most exciting to watch. Now that I've gotten to know these people, I don't even want to watch bull riding, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I interviewed him. I feel like he's a friend, and then he just was stepped on by a bull. But for the fans liking that sport and the intensity, having more and more contestants, regardless of how they identify, has been good for the rodeo, for the gay rodeo.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. This next question is for Eddie Espinoza. All right. So this question was submitted online, and it says, you mentioned the quote, lack of respect surrounding cheerleading in the American sporting ecosystem. Do you believe that mass media products such as Netflix's Cheer may be shifting perceptions of cheerleading?
Yeah, definitely. Things like Cheer and documentary series like that definitely help out highlight our sport. Although it's a little bit dramatized, it does give you an inside view of what it is to be a competitive cheerleader in the college arena. Let's see. I do agree with stuff like that. It's definitely shifting the perspective that we have in cheerleading in America. So hopefully more things come about so that we can change the idea of cheerleading in America.
And just to follow up on that, as someone who's inside that community, how realistic is a product like Cheer? Did you find that to be a representative sample of what life is like?
It just depends. So the team that they focus on in that series is a community college, and community college rules and regulations in Cheer are completely different from a Division I college team. For example, we all have to be full-time students, but community colleges in America the students can drop all their classes after the competition is over. So they aren't necessarily they could be full-time students throughout the entire season, but some of these people that become part of those teams are people that we call career college cheerleaders, that they just join teams just to get the national title. I think it would be best if that documentary series would focus on a 4-year university or 4-year college, because it's completely different. We obviously can't drop classes with W's, and we have to be enrolled full-time.
That's fascinating, and it's also again from people outside of the American sort of university ecosystem, it can be also kind of confusing sometimes. The junior college divide is somewhat a uniquely American sort of feature of the American educational system. That's fantastic, fantastic to hear you to explain that. Alec, this question is from an editorial board member, and it asks, what lessons can be learned from Garth Fagan's example in Rochester?
Good question. And something that, as someone who rarely studies modern history, I am still grappling with that question. There are a few things. The most prevalent which comes to mind is that you don't need to be in the dynamic urban center to make an impact. Garth Fagan, who is, for those who don't know, is internationally renowned. He was the primary choreographer behind the Broadway presentation of The Lion King. He's won awards throughout the world. He had an opportunity to be stationed in New York City, London, Berlin, and he routinely has denied those opportunities for the chance to live out his days in Rochester, which, while a fine city in its own right, certainly pales in comparison to the others. So the primary takeaway is that in studying a man like Garth Fagan, the community impact such a seminal individual can have in a smaller community sort of reinvents the narrative of small fish or big fish, small pond. What he has done is sort of elevated an entire community of fish sort of onto the national stage. And studying that, I think, presents a far more interesting discussion than the sort of pursuit of greatness within these already dynamic cosmopolitan environments. The second thing I think that is noteworthy about Garth Fagan's experience in Rochester is his own admitted difficulty with teaching young men and young women in the same studio. He was someone who was brought up in a highly patriarchal society in the Caribbean. He attended an all-male boarding school, raised in the 1940s, 1950s. And he is on record as saying, like, I have great affection and affinity for his female dancers, although he himself has struggled to teach them in a manner that is different than the sort of harsh, demanding manner that he teaches his male dancers. And so I think that while I didn't explore it so much in the paper, I think there are some interesting gender dynamics in terms of how one can use sport in a lower socioeconomic situation without, on the surface, making much of an adjustment for gender. And I thought that was interesting. It was a common theme that kept coming up throughout his interviews. But aside from the prioritizing of the local community rather than the cosmopolitan entity and this discussion about gender, I think perhaps the larger takeaway is that his work has provided the Black community in Rochester with a dynamic voice, and that this was, more than anything, a study which revealed how a suppressed group of people can find their voice within the community and have it expand beyond their own circle. His dance troupe now commands audiences across the race and gender and age spectrum. And it is routinely ranked as one of Rochester's top attractions from both a cultural and an economic standpoint. And so what he has done to take a very clearly and deliberately oppressed group in the Black community in Rochester and to elevate them to a closer and increasingly closer standard to equal within the community, I think is a phenomenal takeaway.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alec. I would also like to invite those who are attending this digitally here. If you have any questions for the speakers from their presentations, feel free to use the chat function. You can also raise your hand if you know how to do that on the little participants list, and I can ask you to unmute for the questions. But I'll let the participants sort of marinate on that, and I'll keep rolling with questions. This will go to Conor. And Conor, this question is, how would such a gym's organization fit into the contemporary landscape of Irish physical culture? And I remember from your presentation, you did mention that it still exists today. Does this gym stick out as unique? Is this something that you could find in many different gyms in Ireland, or is this sort of one of a kind?
Yeah, and actually that's an excellent question. Thank you to whoever that was. Looking, pardon me, rather, at kind of gyms in Ireland at the moment, it is a landscape much like other parts of Europe and the United States that is dominated by kind of neoliberal principles of profit maximization, which is me. Let me take off my Marxist hat for a minute. But what I mean is that they are profit-driven gyms in Ireland, primarily in 2020. So in the present day, Hercules is almost entirely unique structure. And I think what allows the gym to maintain that sort of structure is that it has a generally older demographic in the upper echelons of its management. So these are individuals who joined the gym in the 70s, some in the 60s, and maintain their membership to the present day. So when new members come in, they're indoctrinated, for want of a better phrase, into the gym practices. So the executive board of Hercules came to the gym at a time when these cooperative gymnasiums were semi-popular in Ireland. At the height of their spread, there was maybe 10 to 15 of these gyms. Ireland's not a particularly large place. You could have driven around to all of them probably in one day. But nowadays, it is an anomaly in the gym landscape in being this cooperative structure. And actually, interestingly, because it has this cooperative structure, it has largely weathered the storm, it seems, in terms of COVID, where traditional gymnasiums are closing down quite quickly in Ireland. I think there's possibly a lesson or a takeaway in that when you have these communal structures, they tend to weather these external shocks quite better than those institutions or organizations where there isn't a loyalty, there isn't a camaraderie, there isn't even a brand community per se. So it's interesting that although it's kind of out there by itself in 2020, it seems to maybe tentatively suggest a return to this sort of structure in the post-COVID age.
That's very good to hear that that's still in good shape and it's in an immediate danger of closing down. That's awesome to hear.
Is there going to be a post-COVID age, Conor?
Hopefully.
I refrain from making any jokes about what an executive may have said about different treatments. And I would say, yeah, there will be a post-COVID age.
Hopefully the people of the future are watching this on YouTube and they're saying, oh, silly people, didn't they know that it would be ending so soon? Now let's move. Actually, Melissa's given us an excellent question that I think I'm going to use as the final question, but I'm going to exhaust our list of questions first and use hers as a wonderful way to finish. This one is for Nick, and it asks about what role does competition play in the gay rodeo? What role does the idea of competition play specifically to the gay rodeo?
Competition is huge. Part of the research, I had to attend, obviously, these events and meet many of the participants for interviews. And in the 1990s, the late 1990s, the Gay Rodeo Association had some 36 chapters around the country and thousands of participants. They raised money for charities and they raised over $1 million each year. I think one year they had 2.5 million raised, but also the prize money for the competition at that time, the championship title for bull riding, for example, the champion earned a $2,500 check, and then it went down. I believe the top 5 finishers in each event earned money, and even in the camp events that I mentioned, like goat dressing, the prize was $1,200. So to kind of be foolish and go out there and have fun and take the rodeo, which is very intense, a little less seriously, that didn't actually happen, because you watch the goat dressing event, and they are intense in wanting to win that prize money, but more importantly, winning the event, you get the prize buckle. And if you know anything about cowboy culture, a buckle is extremely important. To walk in having the most elaborate buckle, especially if it's for winning a rodeo event, then, or the all-around cowboy or all-around cowgirl buckle, then it's extremely important. And during the 90s, like I said, it was part of what I write about in the book that I'm working on, is that cowboy culture became mainstream in U.S. music and pop music stations. So you had Shania Twain, Garth Brooks, LeAnn Rimes, all on these local radio stations that weren't country and western, and so that helped the rodeo grow in numbers as well. Today, the numbers have decreased. I believe there's only 14 active chapters now in the country, and annually about 8 gay rodeos. Obviously, this year they were all canceled. Well, one happened in February, but I'm still interviewing many of them, and they're just dying to get back out there in the arena, because it's fun to compete for them. So I'd say it's very intense.
Fantastic. And the government of Canada thanks you for a Shania Twain mention. That's a 1 point to you. You get 1 little quart of maple syrup is in the mail to you. I
mentioned the Canadian gay rodeo associations in my work as well. So do I get a couple more quotes?
2 quarts of maple syrup, but they are Canadian quarts, which is about 1 millimeter. So I'm sorry about that. So we'll move now to we're going to move to their second question here for Eddie, and the question is. This actually was submitted via Twitter, and it says, how will your own experiences, as you had mentioned being an insider, enable your proposed studies to succeed, aside from access to the data?
I think the terminology, the culture, I'll be able to express that better in my write-up. Also having competed with and gone to college cheer camps with some of the members on the national co-ed team will be also helpful, because it's such a small population. It's going to be hard to kind of tap into them and for them to trust you. So I feel that because I'm an insider, that's going to be helpful for me to be able to get some rich data, and also have their trust as well and build rapport.
Fantastic. And just a personal question I have regarding that, do you plan to have to travel throughout the United States? Are there sort of cheerleading hotbeds, or is that somewhere that you could do even in New Mexico?
So the national co-ed team is comprised of mainly college students. So they pertain to college teams throughout the US. Cheerleading is primarily very competitive in the Southwest of the United States, so Texas, New Mexico, the South, so Kentucky, and then there's a college in Utah that's also competitive too. So the way that I'm gonna go about this is through Zoom, because a lot of people are quarantined right now because of the pandemic. So I'm resorting to Zoom and able to contact them, because they're spread throughout the United States. And then there's some other athletes that are part of that team that are not in college anymore. They're college alumni, so they might be spread out through other states in the US as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And our final submitted question is for Alec, and it asks a question about dance. And it says, is dance uniquely able to heal divisions within a city like Rochester?
Oh, wow. What a great question. The short answer is I don't know. And I would love to find out, to be perfectly honest. In the case of Rochester in particular, it is, for lack of a better term, a theatrical city. The Eastman School of Music is there, which is outside of the famous music school, which I'm now drawing a blank on. That's embarrassing. It's one of the top music schools in the country. The Rochester Jazz Fest is one of the major musical festivals in the summer circuit. So in that sense, yes, I think dance in Rochester is possibly a more accessible form of community healing than it might be in perhaps a less theatrical inclined environment, regardless of how cosmopolitan or rural it might be. The other point I feel I should bring up with Garth Fagan in particular, and I think I mentioned this in my presentation, although admittedly I failed to review it before coming on here. I was too busy with Conor, Eddie, and Nicholas's presentations. Garth Fagan's dance draws heavily from Afro-Caribbean rhythms, so it is very clearly a dance rooted in legacy. Within the African American population in Rochester, there is an oddly high Caribbean population, which has always made zero sense to me, considering that the two climates could not possibly be more distinct. So in that sense, it harkens back to, I think, a much more ethnic background rather than racial background, if we can make that distinction. And for those reasons, I think Garth Fagan has been particularly successful in Rochester. To the larger point about the ability for dance, perhaps in contrast to other sport, in its ability to bring a community together, I am speculating here, which, as Conor can attest, is always dangerous. But I would imagine that there are some aspects of dance that, yes, would lead it to be somewhat more applicable to a community reconciliation aspect. One is probably the nature of choreography is a communal endeavor, and someone who is more well-versed in dance than I am can correct me, please. The other notion about it is depending on who you have directing the performance, there is often this communal feedback as far as what do we want the next show to be, or how are we going to design this so it incorporates the larger, or it incorporates the feelings and emotions of the troupe as a whole, rather than one or two standout performers. And so in that case, it is very much each troupe is sort of its own insular community. And to sort of piggyback off of Conor and this sort of, I'm going to get the word wrong, Conor, I apologize, not community funded, but the fact that the participants of the gym have a vested interest in its success, and Garth Fagan does something very similar to that, in that he keeps the headquarters squarely within the community he draws from. So the community has an incentive to contribute to the health of the program, and his program obviously then has a connection back to the community for a sort of perhaps more unusual feedback loop than you get in 2020. But I think it's what has sustained it through some more difficult challenges and what keeps it going strong today.
Fantastic. And again, we will open it up one last time to anyone participating to submit a question here live. But if not, we are going to move to our final question from Melissa Otterbein, who is attending here digitally as well. And she says, I always enjoy hearing what researchers may like to do next with their research/commentaries. Does anyone know how they might like to use their research in future endeavors? So let's start with you, Conor, on that fitting ending question towards the future.
Yeah, perfect. So thanks so much, Melissa. And that's definitely a question I'm going to steal for future conferences, because it's actually something I'm also very interested in. So thank you for phrasing it better than I ever could. So something that I'm very interested in, and it will be my next research project, is studying exercise across the life cycle, or more specifically, exercise in the aging body. I think as sport historians, for obvious reasons, we get very attracted to the kind of athletic body in its prime. So something I'm interested in is how athletics, exercise, well-being, sense of self changes across the life cycle. So what happens when someone's in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, etc. And Hercules Gymnasium provides like a really interesting ready-made example of that, because as I mentioned, members tend to be several decade members. So in terms of my broader research topic, and I feel comfortable sharing this because very few people study Irish history, the goal is to combine kind of the longitudinal study of membership and life cycle in Hercules with a female equivalent with the Irish branches of the Women's League of Health and Beauty. So track how exercise changes across the life cycle, how it changes when people age, what that means for the participants, how that changes with reference to class, gender, religion, geography, etc. And if anyone is interested, Eileen McRae wrote a wonderful book on this in Great Britain 2 or 3 years ago called Exercise in the Female Life Cycle in Great Britain, which I'm going to shamelessly steal her framework and employ it into the Irish context, because it is something that fascinates me, is exercise in the aging body. Thank you.
Excellent. Nick, why don't you go next?
Okay, that was an excellent question, Melissa, because I mean, on my desk right here is a grant application that I'm filling out due November 1st, as we all have so many deadlines. I'm just trying to keep it on my desk so I don't forget about it. And but it's an outreach grant through my host university and through the Center for Humanities and Arts. And what I'm proposing to do with the funds, I would like to set up a traveling museum display, if you will, of gay rodeo, and start with setting it up at the library at CU Boulder, traveling to Boulder Museum, who's already agreed for to have that, CU Denver, and really try right now within my region, because the funds, I think it's like a $3,000 grant. So as much I can get out of that to host this traveling museum. But if I could take this off for a second, I have as a historian, this is amazing when they give you all of their documents and things they've kept over the years. I mean, I have these, once I've befriended some of them, they were like, oh, sure, you can have this. It's just a box of junk to me, but they've kept it. So it's not an official archive. These are some items that aren't even in the archive. And this is an actual program from a 1983 gay rodeo. So it'll be things like this that I'll have, hopefully safely secured for the event. I would actually present on the gay rodeo for the first night of the viewing, and then leave the museum exhibit up for probably an entire month. So especially if it's on a college campus, students that'll be walking by will see that and learn more about it. So that's a great question, and it is the first time I'm actually doing something with my research other than publishing. So I'm excited about the possibility.
That is fantastic. Not only do you have a possible museum exhibit, you have a possible archive, it seems, developing. That's amazing. Eddie, why don't you go next? And just to rephrase the question, just to restate the question, it was, does anyone know how they might like to use their research in future endeavors?
Yeah, so the plan is after defending my thesis, I do want to publish this master's work. Also, probably continuing this topic in a PhD program in the future, but probably going for more of an ethnography. And since it is an emerging sport and it's at the cusp of becoming an Olympic sport, I think it'll be cool to follow them through the first year of it becoming an Olympic sport. Other things that I probably dabble with would be either doing college cheer teams in the US, or possibly even doing ethnography or interviews with Team Canada, Team Mexico, which are the top 3 or top 4 teams in the cheerleading world.
Fantastic. Every time during your presentation, you mentioned how frequently it was an emerging sport, and I thought, you have found the right journal, Eddie. We are the place for you. So Alec, why don't you finish this off for us and discuss what you plan to use your research for in your future endeavors?
Of course. Thank you again, Melissa, for the question. I haven't had the chance today, but I'm looking forward to watching your recorded presentation at some point over the weekend. I had marked it today, and then I had advisor meetings which covered it up. So I apologize, I couldn't see it live. But as far as the question is concerned, because it's such a vast departure from the dissertation, it will probably be put on the back burner, or it should be put on the back burner for the immediate future. But among the second book projects I seem to be collecting nowadays, a thought of mine has been to do an examination of Rochester in 1997, which was sort of a seminal moment. I use that word multiple times. An important moment in my childhood for any number of their minor league sports. But when I went through this, I was reminded that the first iteration of the Lion King's run on Broadway also took place in 1997. So I have a sinking feeling that Garth Fagan will rise again in my research on Rochester at that point, and to include him in that future work is nothing short of exciting.
Fantastic. Thank you all so very much for your answering of these questions. We've gone exactly as long as we need to go here. And thank you all who submitted questions over Twitter and over email. And thank you all to those who've attended. And if you're watching this on YouTube in sometime in the future, thank you for watching. And we want